They're multiplying rapidly and their impact is spreading across the entire planet. They are causing the extinction of entire species, damaging ecosystems and even turning an air conditioner into a smart investment. You've probably guessed it by now, I'm talking about humans. Even in the most remote places on Earth, you can find evidence for our presence, like those plastic bags scattered around. Since World War II, our population has been growing incredibly fast, and it doesn't seem like it's going to slow down anytime soon. Every hour, babies are being born all around the world, making us wonder, how long can we keep providing enough food and water for all these people? But maybe we're asking the wrong question. Could it be that the way we're thinking about this problem is off? Is it possible that instead of dealing with too many people, we might actually face a different issue, a decline in population? In this video, we are going to explore these questions and much more. So let's not waste any more time and get right into it. To understand the real problem we have with population, we need to look at the past centuries and how humanity developed. Especially in the past 300 years, the way our population grew changed massively. Back in 1700, the Earth's population was roughly about 600 million people. To put that in perspective, it's much less than a tenth of the population we have today. 100 years later, in the 1800s, humanity reached the milestone of 1 billion people on Earth. Another 120 years flew by, and by 1928 the number of human beings had doubled. As time went on, something remarkable happened between 1925 and 1990. The birth rate absolutely skyrocketed. During this time, our population surged by an incredible 3 billion individuals till 1968. Fast forward to July 2023 and our population hovers around 8.1 billion people, with the numbers still on the rise. But why did our population grow so much? What factors contributed to this huge amount of people? To begin with, it's important to understand that there's a crucial link between major advancements in science and the explosion in the birth rates during the 19th century. There are two scenarios that can cause a population to grow. The first one is when the number of deaths becomes fewer than the number of births. The second scenario is obviously the opposite, where the number of births surpasses the number of deaths. Throughout human history, particularly in the previous centuries, the first scenario became a reality. Compared to today's birth rate, the birth rate in 1930 was enormous. For example, let's look at the fertility rate in China in the year 1930. The fertility rate means the average number of babies born by a woman in her lifetime. To maintain a growing population, this number has to be about 2.1 or more. The rate was at 5.5, so we see that getting the babies born was not the problem, but keeping them alive till they can get their own offspring was way harder than today. The child mortality rate, let's look at the children between 0 and 5 years, was at 40% in 1930. So think about this. If you have 5 children and 2 of them don't make it to their 5th birthday, it's quite a scary thought. And now, when you consider that back then people in China were only expected to live until they were 31, it becomes even more alarming. But as I said, the scientific achievements in this time, especially in healthcare, became absolutely game-changing. Better healthcare and higher hygienic standards were one part of the development, but the industrialization and with it the much better food supply for many people played also a major role in it. If you want to use China again as an example, the child mortality rate dropped from 40% in 1930 to 5% in 1990, which is also the time period in which China had its biggest industrialization process. This is also visible in many other European countries in the same proportion, but sometimes a bit earlier because industrialization hit China compared to Europe relatively late. The number of deaths shrunk down massively, but the fertility rate was the same as before, so a huge baby boom was the result. But what happened next? After some of the countries which were the strongest in population had those massive rush of new babies, the wave of births collapsed and contraception and knowledge got more accessible to everyone, and the baby was no longer some sort of life insurance or God-given. At this point it was a question of want and not any longer a question of need to become a parent. Because of that, population growth slowed down, especially in the past 20 years, and it got back to an approximately linear growth rate like 250 years ago. Now comes the problem I mentioned before. The fertility rate has adjusted below 2.1 in many countries, which means that the average age rises and the population gets smaller. Like for example in the USA, China and many European countries. But overall, the number of humans is still rising, much slower than before, but it still keeps going up. To understand why this is so, we have to enlarge the scope of observation. If you put everything in a global context, things change massively, because there are countries which distort the statistics. Parts of Asia, like India and nearly the whole African continent, have a fertility rate way above 2.1. But that's not all. The population is growing there very fast because they are already fixing the problems with child mortality and the supply of food, water and other things that are necessary for life. But things like contraception and basic education, especially for women, are not established in the society yet. Things are looking a lot better there now compared to the past. The end result of this whole process is that it seems that the rapid population growth of humanity has calmed down after the major baby boom, and we now find ourselves in a situation where we might have too many people on the planet, and some believe we've reached a point where Earth can't sustain us anymore. This is a very common belief, but let's pause for a moment. It's not necessarily true that Earth couldn't feed humanity, even if the population was much larger. But that's a topic that deserves its own discussion. And secondly, if you're someone who's curious and digs a little deeper, you'll quickly realize that an entirely different problem is waiting for a solution. Exploring the top 10 countries ranked by GDP unveils a compelling pattern. A staggering 9 out of these top players exhibit a fertility rate below 2.1. Interestingly, a similar trend emerges when we examine the nations responsible for the lion's share of scientific publications. Again, 9 out of 10 display a fertility rate below 2.1. The single exception in both scenarios is India, currently in the midst of a transition from a developing nation to an industrial powerhouse. What does this tell us? It signifies that the very heart of our global society, encompassing both economic prowess and scientific advancement, finds itself at a pivotal juncture. This shift, however, isn't marked by a sudden jolt, but rather a gradual decline that silently affects the mightiest industrial giants. But what are the signs of this menacing decline? The retirement pension was one of the biggest societal advances in the past. It works with the younger generations paying a bit of their money to care for the older ones. And that works as long as the part of young people is significantly bigger in a population than the part of older people. So just as an example, if 5 young people pay for one pensioner, the amount of money required from one of these 5 is relatively small. Now, in a demographic change, the number of young people shrinks down and the difference between the amount of young people and old people becomes smaller. And with it, the required payment from the young ones gets bigger. So providing care for the older generations gets more expensive year after year, and at some point it's no longer possible. The next point is the economy in general. As long as there is a growth in economic force, there is mostly also a growth in prosperity. And this growth correlates to a certain point with 2 factors: industrialization and population growth. In the closer past, both of these factors kicked in more than ever before in human history. Now, if one of these 2 major engines falls out, it will pull the power out of the other one too. For sure, with massive achievements in AI and autonomous working machines made in the past and coming in the future, the development in the industrial sector is faster and more independent than ever before. But such a forced evolution still needs an enormous amount of people who have the possibility for developing the necessary knowledge and ensure this process. So the ironic result of the collapse is a shortage of these urgently needed workers. And it's not a problem that's completely in the future. The increasing shortage of labor is already a crucial problem in the USA and especially in Europe, so that it damages the society and the economy very hard. And as in most conversations nowadays, climate change has also to be mentioned here. The first thought of most people is that having less humans on Earth would solve the climate issue. But that's not really the case. Reason 1. It will likely take around 80 years or more before the global human population significantly decreases along with its CO2 emissions. However, well before that time, large parts of the world will face significant challenges due to rapidly aging populations that are unable to care for themselves and their needs. The opportunity to elevate or reverse climate change solely by reducing CO2 emissions is slipping away. It's highly probable that we'll surpass the critical 1.5 degrees Celsius warming threshold within the next 5 years. Once this threshold is crossed, certain mechanisms are triggered that release more CO2 into the atmosphere, such as the thawing of the permafrost in Russia. Reason 3. Combating climate change requires not only reducing emissions, but also removing existing warming gases from the atmosphere. Methods like planting trees in a big number and advanced industrial solutions can help achieve this, but that's a topic for another video. Initially, we need to replace every aspect of our lives with CO2 neutral alternatives and eventually transform these substitutes into CO2 positive ones. The transition to climate-friendly vehicles, housing and food requires substantial economic resources. If there are fewer young people, especially in the countries leading these innovation efforts, the chances of success decrease significantly. But are there solutions to address this challenge? The very first thing is already done. Many people don't even believe there is a problem with population decline. But as you see, it's not the case. And if you don't believe me, do your own research and you will instantly find evidence for a declining amount of people in the medium to long term on this planet. The majority thinks that having children would worsen overpopulation, but in reality it just makes the opposite problem even more dangerous and climate change nearly unstoppable. There is still a little chance to fight most of the big problems, but it's getting smaller every day, and having less people being able to take on the challenge does not improve the odds. But what could improve the odds, at least for a time, is immigration. Immigration will in the future be one of the most dictating factors for staying competitive in the international comparison as a country. So to compensate a shortage of young workers, it would be possible for the government to change the immigration policies and the integration possibilities to make a country more attractive for immigrants. So before this video ends, as I said before, please do your own research. It's never a good idea to believe everything you heard from the internet without questioning it. All of my sources are linked in the info box. So if you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, it would make me very happy, and I hope that we'll see each other again soon.